And as your revs rise, so will your voice if you're trying to communicate with your passenger, because this car is noisy. Having said that, around corners and on bumpy roads, it really comes into its element. A car that should be driven with a certain amount of verve, I think. £6,500, which isn't bad when you think it's the same cost of a basic Fiesta or Corsa. There's only one big problem. As part of their cost-cutting exercise, Renault have decided to engineer only left-hand drive Twingos, and they've no plans as yet, and certainly not for another 18 months, to produce right-hand drive Twingos, which I for one think's a pity.
Last week, we examined the evidence that motorists in other European countries can buy cars cheaper than we can here in the UK. Now, though, events seem to have moved in favour of the UK motorist. One thing that's helped is the devaluation of the pound. And manufacturers like Vauxhall have started to reduce dealers' profit margins so as to hold down the list price of cars. The question is, how long-lived will these gains for the UK motorist be? September the 16th last year, Black Wednesday. Relentless speculation against the pound pushes it out of the ERM. It's been effectively devalued by more than 10%. That means if you compare the price in pounds of a car in Europe with the same model in the UK, the one in Europe increases in price. Across the Channel in Belgium, it's knocked the stuffing out of the parallel importing trade. In other words, the sale of cars to UK buyers at European prices. For the last 10 years, Michel de Vinck has been in that business. Now the fall of the pound against the Belgian franc has brought it to a virtual halt.
The pound has dropped more than 10 francs to the usual rate and made it naturally very, very difficult for us to match up English prices.
Vauxhall looked at the price of an Astra L 1.4 in January following the pound's fall. On list prices, excluding tax, the UK was still the most expensive market. But once adjustments were made for specification, the UK was cheaper than many countries, though it was more expensive than Spain and Italy. But if UK motorists are now getting a better deal, how long will it last? The fall in the pound means overseas manufacturers get less money from their sales in the UK unless they put up prices. But we've been this way before. Between October 1988 and 1990, the pound fell by about 7%. The independent motor consultants Ludwigsons found that at first the gap between prices in the UK and those in other countries narrowed. But by the end of 2 years, they'd been restored to their original level. Of course, if British car prices do race up again, the UK motorist should have a safeguard, the single European market. Michel de Vinck could be forgiven for being cynical about it. He's found the business of getting right-hand drive cars in Europe for his UK customers more and more difficult.
For example, Fiat, when you ask Fiat, can we have a right-hand drive car? They say yes. How much will it cost? We don't know. How long will it take? Oh, surely 6 months. So it's not even possible to have a price or to discuss the matter.
What reasons do manufacturers give when they won't give you a price list or if they have to delay delivery?
They're not interested. They're not interested. They don't want to sell them, in fact. They have to sell them, but they don't want to sell them.
But the EC has been trying to liberate the car buyer. EC Commissioner Sir Leon Britton wrote to all the car manufacturers, asking them to tell their dealers that they're free to sell to customers in any EC country. He also instructed them to draw up a pan-European price list, allowing consumers to compare the price of a selection of models in each member state. Most UK motorists, though, don't want to go to the trouble of buying a car from abroad. And for the vast majority who depend on dealers in this country, there are still some major problems. More than half the new cars sold in the UK are bought by companies, far more than in any other EC country. Alan Pullham's a senior official of the body that represents car dealers. He thinks the discounts negotiated by companies mean the private buyer pays more.
The smaller company will achieve a discount that is comparable with perhaps a private buyer, a successful private buyer, shall we say. But the larger companies, we know from the MMC inquiry and from our own research, are achieving discounts that could range up to 40 to 45%.
Now, what effect does that have on the private buyer?
Well, I think one has to ask the question, where is this additional discount coming from? recent figures have shown that the majority of the main protagonists in the fleet market are not actually making very much money, if any, at the moment. And if they're funding these fleet discounts, it must be coming out of the price of the vehicle, the list price of the vehicle charged across the whole market. So the private customer must be paying a very large proportion of that.
That kind of discount available has had no impact at all upon the price charged to the one-off purchaser. Indeed, the fact that one is able to satisfy a consumer, a fleet market in the United Kingdom, has in many ways guaranteed assembly lines remaining open, car manufacturers remaining in business, and as a result of the economies of scale, the actual one-off consumer getting a much better bargain than if there was no such thing as fleet operators buying in bulk.
Individual buyers who have to meet all the costs of motoring, like servicing, as well as buying cars out of their own pockets, may well be sceptical about such claims. But now those individuals have had a blow struck on their behalf by the Chancellor. The reason is that from next year, drivers of company cars will be taxed on the list price of their vehicles, rather than on the discounted price their company was able to negotiate. Manufacturers may have to respond by holding down prices for everyone. This could change a peculiar feature of the UK market. Prices on the windscreen have been high, but buyers could try for a discount. The trouble is that a fifth failed, and Vauxhall's research showed that a far higher proportion of diffident British buyers didn't like the process. So the company, along with other manufacturers, has cut dealers' profit margins, with the intention of bringing the price on the windscreen closer to the price you actually pay.
I think manufacturers have now begun to recognise that the public's view on having to haggle in this way, as if you're buying a length of silk from a Far Eastern market, have passed. People want to know the price when they go in, and that is why manufacturers are cutting back on the discounts available to their dealers. After all, some of the discounts that were available were far higher than the continental counterparts, and that had an impact, of course, on published retail prices. Now, eliminating a large portion of that element of the discount and working it down to a very small working margin for the dealer means that the price you see on the car is the price you will pay.
The price that the private consumer sees on the windscreen in the showroom has generally fallen. The actual price that they will pay has generally remained the same, or indeed has increased, because with the decrease in dealer margin there follows obviously a decrease in the amount of discount that's available.
This former vicarage at Skipton in North Yorkshire houses the CAP Motor Consultancy, which studies car prices for independent surveys and for major players in the industry. Some of its research suggests we shouldn't get too excited about the prospect of bargain car prices. CAP found a random sample of 4 British cars increased in price by over 100% during the last 10 years, much faster than the rate of inflation. The manufacturers have an explanation.
If one does a straight comparison of list price versus inflation, it takes no account of the way in which specifications have been increased over time through that same period. New models, updated models, the advent of such things as ABS, catalytic converters and so on, all have an effect on list price, but are outside of any normal inflationary trend.
My response to that will be in 2 parts. Firstly, that the increase in specification is not necessarily what the private consumer would have desired due to the reliance in the UK car market upon the fleet sector. And secondly, that during that period there has been a great deal of improvement in the way vehicles have been made. There has been vast advances in productivity levels within the UK car production, and that doesn't necessarily seem to have fed through to the price that we have seen in the forecourt.
So although there are indications that we may be moving towards a market where UK motorists no longer have to look enviously across to the continent, not all the signs are good. And there was more bad news when CAP looked at what's happened to a random selection of car prices since the government took off special car tax.
In terms of the car tax element of the list price, we would have expected a 6.6% fall in the price of the vehicle. We have actually found over that year that the price of a vehicle compared to 1 year ago is now only 0.8% lower, and that means that there has been a 5.6% effective increase in price, which is equivalent to around 3 times the current rate of inflation.
And however UK car prices compare with the rest of Europe, there's still a huge gap between prices in Europe and those in some other parts of the world. Japanese motorists may have to negotiate some of the world's worst traffic jams, but their cars cost up to 40% less than in Europe. And although the European car market is now the biggest in the world, bigger than America's, the US motorist still has the last laugh. His car can cost up to 45% less than what we pay in the old continent.
As anybody who's ever been to the United States will tell you, one of the most impressive sights on the road is that of the giant rigs relentlessly eating up mile after mile of American interstate highway.
In fact, we're not in Colorado or Kansas or anywhere else in America. We're in Britain, as you can probably gather by the weather, deep in the county of Kent.
Folk in these parts have grown quite used to the sight of this overseas visitor trundling along those quaint little A and B roads, eclipsing not only other traffic but also entire buildings.
These contraptions look pretty huge when they're out on the open road. When you come face to face with them, they're absolutely ginormous.
And big trucks mean big truckers. Don't they? Obviously not. Jan Tibble, all 5 foot of her, the owner of this stack, has driven various trucks for years.
I've done quite a few different varieties of jobs, tipping rubbish, tipping chalk, etc. And I think really when you're a female, they give you the less sort of glamorous jobs, especially if you're starting out new as well. And then if you do any, like if you're into a